Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 111 of the Liberator podcast. I am James Silberman. That is Sam Riley. And we are joined by two guests today. We are joined by our pastor, Dusty Deevers. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. Glad to be here.
And we also have attorney and director of Abolish Abortion Texas and Foundation to Abolish Abortion, Bradley Peirce.
Hey, guys. Good to be with you.
Good to have you guys. So what we're going to get into today is someone who we've addressed on this podcast before. We've addressed Bart Barber, who is the now president of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. The last time we talked about him, he was not the president, but he was testifying at the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention against the abolitionist resolution and things like that. And I've kind of had in my mind Bart Barber. He's testified against us. He's made like Facebook live streams against our resolutions. But I've had him as like he's a reasonable guy. I've been in group chats with him, Dusty. We were in a group chat, and he seemed reasonable, asking questions, pretty calm for the most part. But some switch has flipped for Bart Barber, and his Twitter threads recently were rather outlandish, and they were their attacks on abolitionism, the attacks on you personally, were just outrageous, and I think a lot of SBC people watching this will know what we're talking about when we say that they're outrageous, and we'll get into it later how outrageous they were. But that's what we're talking about today. The president of the SBC has gone after you personally, has gone after the abolitionist movement with outrageous lines of attacks. So first thing that I think is worth noting in this Twitter thread, he ignores all of the context. So the context of your tweet that he was responding to was Brent Leatherwood, the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, at this point the acting president, or the interim president, signed an open letter which killed the Abolition of Abortion in Louisiana Act. That bill sailed through committee. Every Republican supported it. It was going to sail through on the floor of the House, but 78 or something, or some pro-life groups came out with an open letter opposing that bill, saying no mother may ever face any penalty, no matter how many of her children she murders. And Brent Leatherwood, on behalf of the ERLC, which is an SBC entity, signed that letter and killed the Abolition of Abortion in Louisiana Act. So he was recently made from interim president to permanent president. So he's now the president. You tweeted your displeasure with that. You basically said that he had sided against preborn children in Louisiana. Not that he hates preborn children generally, but that in Louisiana, he sided against preborn children by opposing that bill, which is absolutely accurate. And Bart Barber, got very, very, very upset. So that's kind of the context of what's going on. So let's get into Bart's actual tweets here. He begins the thread. This tweet represents the lowest point of dishonesty to which we can descend when we sell out to the crass tone of secular politics instead of following the way of Christ. Dusty, what do you think about your criticism of Brent Leatherwood being president is the lowest point of dishonesty?
Well, I can think of a lot lower ways to go, and probably some of them would be the way that he treated me and abolitionists. Slander is lower. Lying outright is lower. Inflammatory types of charges towards me that I have an obsession with throwing 16-year-old girls who've been coerced under duress from their parents into an abortion. That's incendiary. It's not serious.
Right.
I don't take it seriously, but I think he intended it to be serious, and I think it just goes to only help us because it's so outlandish. And that's dishonesty. That's descending. That's crass. But I'm a big boy. I can take it. If we're gonna play in this space, then you got to be ready to roll with the punches.
Yeah. Right. So his exact quote there, because unless you agree 100% with every jot and tittle of Deevers' obsession with sending 16-year-old girls to prison for succumbing to the coercion of their parents to have an abortion, he will label you against the innocent preborn. I mean, that's outrageous, right? That's not anything that you have ever said. That has not been contained in any abolition bill ever.
Yeah.
And he's saying that this is your position and that of the abolitionist movement.
Yeah. Well, it's also just borrowing from pro-abortion talking points. There's nothing about that point that no one has ever made this point honestly. Like, it's always been, you want to throw 16-year-old girls in jail after they've been raped or whatever. Well, no. I mean, the law that's not how the law works. The law is going to evaluate everything that went into that. If there was parents that were coercing her, if she did it under duress, all those different things are going to come into play in the courtroom, and none of us have ever said, yes, we want to go throw 16-year-old girls in prison after they've killed, or if they were involved in the abortion or whatever. So yeah, it is just a pro-abortion talking point.
Right. And he tweeted later on, he said, if you ask the abolitionists to protect minors, women coerced by abusive spouses or boyfriend, women coerced by parents, women coerced by pimps or traffickers, he, the abolitionist, will be glad to put that sentiment into a tweet. He just won't put it into his proposed law. So again, the laws that we're writing are saying that women who are raped, like high school age girls who are raped and forced to have abortions by their pimps or the parents or whoever, that we want those women thrown in jail, and we will never put anything in our laws to protect those women. Here's a quote directly from the Abolition of Abortion in Oklahoma Act, SB 495. All persons are capable of committing crimes except persons belonging to the following classes. And then one of the classes: persons who committed the act or make the omission charged while under involuntary subjection to the power of superiors. Right. So again, I'll assume he doesn't know what he's talking about, and not that he's intentionally lying about what the content of an abolition bill is, but it's right there. And Bradley, and you can maybe speak to this, being that you're the author of most abolition bills across the country. Are there any abolition bills anywhere that would have allowed a 16-year-old girl who had been raped and coerced by a pimp or a trafficker or her parents, that she would have gone to jail?
Absolutely not. No, in fact, they all say the opposite, which is that someone who's under duress cannot be prosecuted, right? Someone who may have done the act of an abortion, but if they did it under duress by someone else, then the person who put them under duress, yeah, they are guilty for the act of the abortion. But the person who was under duress, whether it be a 16-year-old, 25-year-old, whoever it may be, absolutely, they're not liable for criminal prosecution because they essentially had a gun to their head whenever they did it.
Yeah, for sure. No, it is crazy to me that this is the president of the SBC, the largest Protestant denomination in the world, I believe. Almost. Maybe the Anglicans are bigger. I can't remember for sure. But anyways, very large, powerful man, and he's going after a small-time pastor in Elgin, Oklahoma, falsely. That is like, it's just mind-blowing to me that we're having this conversation about this. I don't know.
I think it's a grace of God.
Yeah.
Not his sin, but God always works good, even though certain men might intend evil or intend harm. I'm not saying that he necessarily had malice intent toward me. I don't know what his intent fully was, but God can work all things together for good, and I think that what has happened here is that it's working actually for good towards more and more people coming toward a biblical position on protecting all lives from fertilization. And you cannot get around this fact in Scripture that God created all people in his own image from conception or fertilization, and he, as their creator and the owner of their souls, recognizes them as being in his image and therefore deserve the same protection that you or I deserve. And so to love our neighbor, even our preborn neighbor, as ourself, is to grant them the life that they deserve and the protection that they deserve. And, I think that's the position that most Christians probably think that most of their legislative authorities actually hold. And they probably think most of their religious leaders actually hold that, but now they're coming now that so many people in leadership and in authoritative positions and in the pro-life establishment are coming out and saying, no, that's not actually the position that we hold. We do not want to see equal protection extended. We don't want abortion in the homicide codes and criminalize the act here of preborn homicide from fertilization. It's a major exposure. And so by God's grace, you've got the president of the biggest Protestant denomination, at least in the United States, not denomination, but network of churches, coming after a small town pastor on this particular issue. And so I think it's a mass conversion event, and I appreciate Bart Barber actually doing this, even if it wasn't his intent.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that he gets into next in his thread here is he does the thing that almost all pro-lifers do this whenever they're being criticized and responding to criticisms from abolitionists, is they pound their chest about how pro-life he is, how pro-life the SBC is. So Deevers is attacking the consistent pro-life position of the SBC as represented by more than 20 resolutions, as represented by our financial support of crisis pregnancy centers, our legislative work on pro-life bills. So again, we're super duper pro-life, but again, ignoring the context. Yes, we're not denying that you're pro-life. We're not denying any of your resolutions, any of your donations to CPCs or to Right to Life groups, any of that.
No, we would actually affirm it.
Right.
What he said, what Brent Leatherwood said at the SBC this summer, and then what was in that letter, was that the pro-life establishment has never supported criminalizing women. Now, we aren't for criminalizing women per se.
I know lots of women. I don't want them criminalized.
I don't want my wife criminalized just for being a woman.
Yeah.
What we're saying is any person who's involved in preborn homicide with intentional malice to murder their child and actually even participates in it or goes through with it, then they're criminals. And the teeth of the law need to clamp down on those people, just like they would anybody else that kills someone with intent and malice in their hearts. So they have said that the pro-life establishment position, at least since Roe, has been that they will never give equal protection to all preborn.
Yep.
They want to give it to some, and we don't know for sure which some. Some of them are saying even to the heartbeat level, but we're not quite ready to say embryonic from the moment of fusion of the egg and sperm. They're not saying that yet.
Right. Yeah. So again, we're not denying Bart and everyone who's on Bart's side. We're not denying that you're pro-life. We are affirming that and then saying the pro-life movement and virtually almost every pro-life group with any political influence wrote an open letter saying the pro-life movement, like I think it was like every single pro-life, like in their putting and their explaining of it, every pro-life group believes that no woman should ever face any penalty for having an abortion. And that is the context of the disagreement here. Yeah. We're not denying that you're pro-life. We're just pointing out that the pro-life movement supports the act of abortion not being a criminal act.
Yeah, and Dusty's original tweet was about Brent Leatherwood. It was not. It wasn't even anything to do with the 20 resolutions that they've written, all the things that they've believed in the past. It was Brent Leatherwood came out and was against a specific bill. And so even they're the ones who are attacking here. They're the ones who have gone on the attack against the abolition bill. And yes, we're against all their bills. We've never successfully killed one. They've successfully killed ours in dozens and dozens of instances at this point. So to act like you're the victim in this case, like we're going after you, is not the case. It was Dusty responding to the fact that the president of the ethics committee went after us on this. Yeah. So we should be able to clearly just talk about the fact that they're the ones that are attacking, not us per se in this instance.
Right. So going on in the Twitter thread here. So again, let's go back to one of the most slanderous parts here. So, because unless you 100% agree with every jot and tittle of Deevers' obsession with sending 16-year-old girls to prison for succumbing to the coercion of their parents to have an abortion, he will label you against the innocent preborn. Because if you want an exception in the law for ectopic pregnancies, where the mother and the baby would be in grave danger of death if the pregnancy were not ended, he will label you against the innocent preborn. And here's where it gets probably to the most slanderous part of the whole thing. Even he knows that this isn't true. Even Dusty Deevers, and he tags you, even Dusty Deevers knows that Brent Leatherwood isn't against the innocent preborn. He's just hoping that you won't know that.
And read the next phrase.
because honest discussion of the actual issues is not his goal, is not your goal.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to that, Dusty?
Oh, there's a lot there, but I would just say no, honest discussion is what we've been trying to have with our past two resolutions at SBC in 2021 and then 2022 when Bart Barber was the chairman of the resolutions committee, and Bradley and my resolution went to him, and I had a 20 to 30 minute conversation with Bart over the phone prior to SBC. He was telling me how the resolutions worked and the process, and that they had received it, and he actually said that he agreed with a lot of what we were doing in there, and he recognized that the one from 22 this summer had a statement on ectopic. We had one an amendment that we were going to be proposing in 21 if we needed to on ectopics, but we actually added that amendment to the 22 resolution that never saw the light of day because there was clearly a strategy to shut us out. But Bart and I talked about those matters on the phone before SBC. Bart said that he appreciated our resolution and he agreed with much of it. So he's not foreign to abolitionist perspective and equal protection perspectives on this issue. So I don't know why totally he went this direction, but it was completely ignorant. It was unfounded, and I gotta think he knows better. So we are trying to have an honest discussion. And if he wants to have it, let's do it. Let's find some way to get together. Even if the three elders that are at our church need to drive down to Farmersville, we'll do that. I think we probably need to do that anyway to deal with the slander, because I think that's what brothers need to do. Like, you slander me pretty hard. I'm willing to forgive you. Let's have a conversation so that we can reconcile, and so that the other folks in your church can see you actually being repentant and reconciling over this matter.
And the added context of the fact that you've had personal conversations with him. You've had a personal conversation with Brent Leatherwood when we were down there. And as James said, he's been in text groups with some of the leading people in the abolitionist movement. He knows full well what the argument is. This is not as though he's just ignorant about all this stuff. He's had an opportunity to hear from the people that are putting forward the bill in pretty much all the different states. I mean, I think Bradley and people from AATX, you guys have even been involved in some of those talks with him. He knows. There's far too much information for him to be going off and doing this kind of thing. And even if he didn't have all that information, to try to actually verify this stuff would be great.
And one of the other topics was ectopics, no pun intended. And he knows better about that as well. It was in our resolution, but I think Bradley it would be good for him to address some of these lies that he has stated about abolitionists, saying, well, we're willing to put it into tweets, but not in our bills.
Right.
And Bradley demonstrated that he had included those in the bills via tweet responses. But Bradley, you want to address some of that?
Real quick, I actually have the quote from the Oklahoma abolition bill. So I'll read this from our bill, and then Bradley, you can talk about kind of all the other abolition bills around the country. So again, he says, like you said, Bart is saying the abolitionist will gladly put, we'll talk about ectopics in a resolution or a tweet, but he won't put it in his bill. Well, here is the quote from the bill from the Abolition of Abortion in Oklahoma Act, SB 495. The provisions of this section shall not be construed to apply to cases in which a physician licensed to practice medicine in this state attempts in a reasonably prudent manner to prevent the death of an unborn person or a pregnant woman. Right? So exactly what he's looking for is already in the Abolition of Abortion in Oklahoma Act. Bradley, is that kind of, is language like this or very, very close to this present in abolition bills around the country?
Yeah, well, and yes, it is. And that's what I sent over to him when he said, he had several statements about that. He said they just won't put it in the bill, and then he ends, I think his second thread there by saying they will never put it in the bill.
Yep.
And it's like, no, I just sent him 6 screenshots from 6 different bills where that is in there, where that language is in there. Now, it's true that there are some bills, or at least one in particular, that I think he's looked at or is thinking about or talking about, and that's the Louisiana bill, where it was not explicitly in the bill, but that's because the laws of Louisiana, just like the laws of every state, would already have an exception for that, and would allow doctors to, make the difficult decision, if they have to, after, treating both those patients, doing everything they can to save the life of both. But if they have to triage, if only one life can be saved, and if only the mother's life can be saved, then, directing care toward her, and making sure that they save her life. Like I said, laws in every state allow for that. And that's why the bill in Louisiana didn't explicitly include it, because that was already the law. But even so, there's 6 examples that I sent to him where we have explicitly included that. Even when we haven't needed to, we have included that, and we're going to continue to include that, at least in the abolition bills that I have anything to do with. We're going to continue to include that across the country.
But really what we're calling for is that all lives be treated equally. And if we are going to take all lives, take it seriously, to treat all lives equally, then we will work towards those ends. And I just don't see that working towards those ends in this tweet thread.
Yeah. And this is one of those cases, like there's parts of this, and there's parts of the incrementalist abolitionist dispute that there is an actual philosophical debate to be had, and we need to have that debate, hopefully in some sort of public discussion, which would be awesome if they would agree to that. But there's also some parts of this tweet thread that are just outright not true, like outright false. And so on those sorts of things, you would expect someone like Bart, who is a pastor, right, who's an elder of a church in, I think, Farmersville, Texas. And you would expect someone like that, when he says just blatantly false things, to publicly correct those blatantly false things. And so this would be one of many things in this tweet thread again. And Bradley, I guess you sent him those screenshots. Has he responded to your messages at all, or?
No, not at all. Yeah,
Wow.
like I said, he said that we never did that. I sent him 6 examples where we did that.
Mm-hmm. No response.
No response, no correction at all.
Mm-hmm. And so that's very disappointing to hear from someone. Again, this is a very influential person. This is someone who I know a lot of SBC people look up to. And so to see, if that is the case, if he continues to not correct what is obviously blatantly false, that would demonstrate, a real lack of humility and a real desire to protect himself. Instead of caring about the truth, instead of caring about the pastors in his convention and their reputations and their good names, instead of slandering them. And so this is one of those places where he really just, like, a public correction is absolutely needed. Like, there's no way that he can maintain no way that he should be able to maintain his credibility as an honest person if he does not publicly correct these things.
Yeah, and we can say it calmly as well. Bart, you have lied, and you need to retract this stuff. You need to apologize, because slandering your brothers in Christ is something that you should really, really seriously let that rend your heart and stop. You've been corrected, you've been told, stop lying, change your mind, take down the tweets.
All right, so next here, let's get to a kind of legally technical part of his tweet thread. And this is from his tweet thread the day after the one that was directed at Dusty. He started a whole nother tweet thread in which he made kind of some technical arguments that, again, were just not demonstrating a very good grasp of the legal principles that he's talking about here. And Bradley, I'll have you respond to this. So he says, the abolitionist will tell you that the coerced child or abuse victim or kidnapped sex trafficking victim won't be prosecuted because there are already exceptions in murder law for coercion. But the abolitionist won't tell you that those are, quote unquote, affirmative defenses. If you add an exception to the abortion law, the coerced 16-year-old or the coerced sex trafficking victim has the same legal protection we expect as Americans. The state has to meet the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not coerced in order to convict her. If you do not add an exception to the abortion law, all the state has to prove is that she had an abortion. Now she has to prove that she was coerced. She'd better have the money to hire a pretty good lawyer, like most sex trafficking victims are rolling in money. For the pimp, though, the parent, for them to convict them of some sort of conspiracy crime and coercing her to have the abortion, the state has to meet the burden of proof, because their coercion is an element of the crime for them. I guess that girl had better hope the pimp wrote down some sort of get that girl an abortion manifesto that her lawyer can discover and present at court. Otherwise, she's going to prison and he's going home a free man. Bradley, what do you make of all that legally?
Yeah, so he's, I think, little confused about the way that things work here, in criminal law. So, when it's, I think everybody knows and has heard that the defendant has a presumption of innocence until proven guilty, right? Then it's the burden of the state or the government to prove the person's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They have the burden of proving the elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. This person, they caused the death of this other person, that this other person did die, and that they were the cause of it, and that they did so with criminal intent, right? Whether it be they did it intentionally or they did it knowingly, or for manslaughter they did it recklessly, or it could be criminal negligent homicide, depending on what their mental state was, right? So there's these various kind of intents, and yes, the burden of proof is on the government to prove all of those things beyond reasonable doubt to the trier of fact, a jury. So that's kind of what most people are already familiar with. But then there's a number of defenses that people can raise. They can raise the defense of self-defense. Yes, I did cause this person's death, and yes, I did intend to pull the trigger, and I didn't necessarily want them to die, but I'm trying to stop them. So yeah, I did know that it would kill them and stop them. So yes, I technically did do that, but it was self-defense, right? So there's a justification for it. And so they'll raise these sorts of things, or they'll say, well, I did do this thing, like an ectopic, right? I did do this thing that did cause the death of this baby, but it wasn't our intent, right? We did it to save the life of the mother, which is kind of falls under this necessity doctrine. Or there's, yes, I did technically do this. I did technically drive this, a bank robber. I did drive the car and drove him over there, and he went in and came out, and then I drove him, away, and he escaped. But his co-conspirator had a gun to my head the whole time, and so I was under duress, right? So what that's what he's talking about, where you kind of say, yes, I technically did this thing, but I have a defense. I did this thing under duress, for example, and that's what he's talking about here. That if a mother were prosecuted by by the government, said, hey, she got an abortion, then the law would allow her to say, well, yes, but I had a gun to my head. And he's saying that by the mother having to raise that defense, that's somehow putting extra burden upon her versus the pimp, who would, you'd have a harder time convicting him than her. And that's absolutely not true. She could certainly raise the defense and again put forward evidence to do it. And the reason why it's not just a misunderstanding, but it's actually a kind of an illogical position, is that I think many people if you've studied logic at all, that proving a negative is virtually impossible, in many, many cases. How do you prove that something did not happen? Where are you going to get evidence to show that something did not happen? What evidence would there be? Mm-hmm. Right? No, you have evidence when you're proving the affirmative, right? This did happen. And so the way that it's going to work out, even if you were to put the burden on the government, it would still work out the same way, because the government's going to say, to the witness, was his mother under duress? No, she wasn't. Okay, there you go. They've now met their burden. They've now raised that. Now it's going to be the same way, whether you classify it the way he's saying or the way that the law already classifies it, her raising a defense. Then she's going to say, no, actually, I was under duress, and here's the evidence that proves that. Mm-hmm. So again, I think what he's trying to rewrite the criminal code ultimately to create some special situation that's really not going to change anything. And again, we already have this entire body of law that deals with homicide pretty well, not perfectly. It could be improved, but we all trust it to protect our lives right now. And it already exists. It already has all these defenses and exceptions and all that in there for these kind of situations that he's raising. That's already there. Mm-hmm. And what we're saying is the same law that already applies to protect the lives of born people. You take that law and allow it to protect the lives of people before they're born. And that's really all that we're doing here.
So something that I haven't really heard it many people talk about, and Bradley, you could talk more to this. A lot of these arguments are made in the context of abortion clinics or abortuaries actually being in existence, and there being this environment where the person who's really going to be able to coerce this woman, he can just bring her under gun or under knife or under duress right up to the door of the abortion mill, and then someone who is also murder-minded is going to bring them in and be complicit in that murder. Whereas if you pass an abolition bill, all those are gone, and now a woman who's pregnant, she's either going to be forced into a back alley or something like that under some type of duress or something, or he's going to try to take her to a hospital. And then you've got security there. You've got all this medical staff and others who are going to recognize they're going to be witnesses to the coercion and be able to give a defense for her as well. So it's just a different environment if you have an abolition bill that's being passed in that whole world, that whole realm, without abortuaries.
If you make abortion homicide for everybody, including the mother, then even someone who encourages the mother or aids her in any way to commit that homicide, that person is guilty, right? It's not just someone who forces her, but someone who even encourages her, right? Because maybe it'd be, okay, you may say, well, it's going to be difficult to prove that the pimp forced her. Well, the good thing about saying it's homicide is even if you can just prove that he encouraged her, right, then you can go prosecute him.
Yeah.
So again, there's so many reasons and so many good things that come from classifying it as homicide, not putting it in the health and safety code and that sort of thing like people try to do with a lot of our abortion statutes, but put it in the homicide code. Like I said, we have a millennia old development of our homicide codes, from the common law well before this country was ever even in existence. It's been developed for centuries and lots of great stuff in there. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to, kind of think up all these different things. We've already encountered all these things. We've already dealt with all these things, and we've made provisions for them in our homicide codes, in our criminal, codes of criminal procedure. And we've already got entire huge bodies of case law to deal with exactly the sorts of things that he's raising.
Yeah, his argument.
And you know what? Juries are smart.
Mm-hmm.
Prosecutors are smart. Law enforcement are smart. Grand juries, judges, appellate court, governors. There's so many people that would be involved in one of these prosecutions who are all involved with it, that it takes a lot to get someone convicted and to get someone sentenced for something, for any kind of homicide.
Yeah.
So to even think, to even imagine that a prosecutor is going to, even prosecute,
mm-hmm.
or even that a mother's 16-year-old who's coerced into an abortion is even going to be investigated,
mm-hmm.
By law enforcement, much less prosecuted, much less indicted, much less convicted, much less sentenced. It's just absurd to think that that's even going to happen.
Why are these arguments even coming up if the pro-life establishment has been fighting in this space for 49 years and these arguments are still being made?
Yeah.
And that's a legitimate question. Why are we making these kinds of arguments or having to respond to these kinds of statements if they've been fighting in this space so hard and treating that person from fertilization as though it was an equal to you or me?
Mm-hmm. What's the phrase that they use that a lot of people use? Don't make it this, make it unthinkable.
Yeah,
illegal. Yeah, don't make it illegal. Make it unnecessary or unthinkable.
Or not. Don't make it. It's. I'm not just trying to make abortion illegal. I'm trying to make it unthinkable or something like that.
Right. Which again, depending on what we mean by that, unthinkable. We're human nature is. We're depraved human beings. We've understood this as Christians for a long time. Our founding fathers understood that. Our entire system of government is understood.
Mm-hmm.
Is built upon that. Even the most virtuous, people who are, get elected, are still just people that are, oftentimes driven by the wrong motives. you're not going to make abortion unthinkable, right? The only time abortion is going to be unthinkable is when we're all in heaven, right? Then abortion is going to be unthinkable. Then people aren't going to think about, doing harm against their neighbor. Mm-hmm. But ever since, Cain and Abel, we've had people thinking about doing harm against their neighbor, and especially doing harm against the most vulnerable, weakest of their neighbors. And so that it's not going to be unthinkable. And the way to make it the least thinkable or the most unthinkable is to make it illegal. Exactly. Right? Why is murder unthinkable for most people, except the most homicidal maniacs? Yeah. Right? Why is murder unthinkable for most people? Because it's illegal. Because the consequences for doing it are extremely serious. Yeah. That's why it's unthinkable for most people, and that's how we need to make it unthinkable for most people, is by making it homicide and illegal.
Yeah. And I think if you just did the old pro-life tactic and trotted out the toddler on this one, and I think most people would see that Bart's argument proves a lot too much. If you have a born child, the woman was raped, or she's got a pimp or something like that, and that child ends up in a gutter somewhere, I don't think Bart's going to be making these arguments against our law right now. But that's what we want for the law. We want the laws that we currently have in that same situation to apply to the preborn child. We know that a woman in that situation with a born child probably would not be prosecuted, probably would not go to jail. The guy who killed the baby and the guy who pressured her to kill the baby and the guy who raped her would probably go to jail, because our system actually can solve that situation and is going to be just towards that baby and towards that woman. But I think Bart does not see how his argument is just proving way too much here.
Yeah. Yeah, one point, we've touched a little bit on this, but I just want to just really hit home just kind of how absurd some of the stuff in this Twitter thread was. There's like multiple layers to the nonsense within one single sentence of this tweet thread. So if you do not add protection for those coerced to the abortion law, all the state has to prove is that she had an abortion. Now she has to prove that she was coerced. So first of all, again, as we talked about, there is protection for the coerced in every single abortion law. Or, as you said, Bradley, in the one state where it wasn't explicit in the law, it was explicit in existing Louisiana law. So it's in every place it's explicit in the law except for one where it's already in the law. So he's wrong there. He's assuming that it's not already there, and it is. But then further, Bradley, can you talk about this? So he says, if there's no explicit protection for the woman who's coerced into having an abortion, then the state has to only prove that she had the abortion. They don't have to prove anything beyond that. And she has to prove to the court that she was not coerced. I know we've talked a little bit about that, but just kind of honed in on that sentence right there.
Yeah, I mean, again, the state just has to prove the elements of the crime, right? And yes, then it would be up to her side to raise, oh no, but I was under duress, right? Because otherwise, everybody's just going to say they're under duress. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I was under duress. Oh, well, I guess you get a pass. No, I mean, there has to be some evidence showing that you were under duress. Yeah. And, but if you really were, there should be evidence. And if it's unclear, guess what? You don't get, you don't get convicted, because the government has to prove theirs beyond a reasonable doubt. So, and here's the other thing that he mentions. He makes it sound like, well, she's probably not going to be able to afford an attorney. Right. Well, guess what? Under the U.S. Constitution and state constitutions, like we've all heard the Miranda warning, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to consult an attorney. If you can't afford one will be provided to you, right? It's in our law in this country, you can't be prosecuted for a crime without, having an attorney. If you can't afford one's going to be provided to you. That's our legal system. You're going to have an attorney, and your attorney is going to raise these arguments. Mm-hmm. And guess what? If your attorney doesn't raise these arguments, then on appeal, the case is going to be thrown out, and you'll get a new attorney. Yeah. There's so many protections there, and this is called due process, right? Well, which is also in the same 14th Amendment that provides for equal protection. It also provides for no person shall have their life, liberty, or property deprived of them without due process, right? Yeah. So no mother should be deprived of due process. Absolutely. Even if they had, even if they're suspected of murdering their own child, then they get due process, just like all the rest of us do, just like we trust, to protect all the rest of us. They get due process. They get an attorney, and they get the same, justice system that already protects the rest of us.
And also the sympathy that he's able to draw from here for the woman who was raped or abused, that sympathy is going to come out with a jury too, like for better or for worse. There's going to be people who are going to be looking at that situation and all the different details of it, and the state would have to convince a jury to convict a woman that was raped in this instance. And that's not going to be an easy thing to do. So, even the argument that he's using, the emotional appeal that he's making, that's all going to come into play in front of a jury. They're going to have to see exactly what happened there and judge whether or not they can put her up on murder charges if she really is innocent. And that's, that's something that's going to come out.
I think it's important to point out right now, the pro-life laws that have been written say, essentially, no matter how clearly the mother intended to kill her baby, she wasn't coerced, she wasn't under duress, she knew what she was doing, she shouted her abortion, she videoed it, she said, I know it's baby murder, I love doing it, some of them are saying, like, I eat fetuses, right? All kind of just horrific, heinous people, like, there's like satanic, they're literally offering these babies to Satan in some places. The pro-life laws say no matter how horrible and how obvious it is, they're still innocent under the law as long as it's the mother. Mm-hmm. That's what the pro-life laws say.
Right.
The abolition bills that we write, all they say is that every case should be decided on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one other thing,
we're not saying that they're all guilty.
Yeah,
we're not saying that they're all guilty. All we're saying is every case should be looked at and decided on a case-by-case basis, just like every other suspected homicide of a born person. We do the exact same thing when it comes to the death and suspected homicide of a preborn person.
Yeah.
The problem is you have to start from a biblical perspective about life to actually say that they deserve due process.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Sam, you were talking about the sympathy on the part of the juries, right, for these women who have been either obviously or it eventually comes out in the evidence that they were actually abused and coerced. It's like, there's a sympathy from the juries, but there's also like any prosecutor who's worth his salt. If there's any evidence whatsoever that she was coerced, right, a prosecutor who's doing their job well will have sympathy for that woman and will never charge. And Bradley, this is something that you talk about. It's like that applies every way up, every step along the process of eventually giving someone a sentence for a crime, right? There's the prosecutor, there's the judge, there's the jury, there's the appellate court, the next appellate court, the next appellate court, the governor of the state. There's all these steps, and they have to virtually unanimously agree that this woman or this man or whoever it was is guilty of this crime and was not coerced or was not operating on a mistake of fact or something like that. Yeah. And so again, for those women who are legitimately coerced, there is no the picture that he portrays here of these women who are just going to be out of luck because the legal system is going to just screw them over because of the way we've written our abolition bill or something. It's just absurd. It's absolutely absurd, and it demonstrates the lack of legal understanding that Bart Barber has when he addresses these things.
And I think if we were thinking of abortion with completely sanctified minds, if Bart and we were, the sympathy card that we would all be playing is for the millions of murdered children, and we wouldn't be messing around with exceptions to that rule. We'd be saying, look, someone is being murdered here. We should have compassion on them. We should serve justice in these cases. And yes, we're going to figure out with the legal system how all of these harder cases are determined, but the pressing need is a law that would protect them in all the cases like what Bradley mentioned, where the normal case, where you have women who are shouting their abortions, who are running around saying, yes, they murdered their child. Like, that is the normal case of abortion. That's not the exception. And Bart Barber's idea of law would completely exclude them from any penalty. And that is not compassionate. That is hateful. Like, Bart, you should realize how absolutely hateful that is to your neighbor, that you wouldn't demand justice for those cases.
Right.
Well, and you're being hateful not just toward the baby, but you're being hateful toward their mother. because you are telling their mother that they have a right to kill their own children.
Right.
You're telling the mother that that's okay, that they're innocent, that they're a victim, and that's wrong. That's what does Jesus tell us? We see it in the Old Testament. He repeats it in the New. It's called the royal law, second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is really what it comes down to. And, a man, just to be clear, a man came up to Jesus and said, well, who is my neighbor? Because he's trying to find a way to get out of loving his neighbor. And Jesus basically tells a story that takes the person that he probably despises the most and makes that person his neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think the point there is every human being is your neighbor. That's what Jesus is saying. And then we have the Constitution, which says no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. All right, what are the laws that protect persons? Okay, well, those laws should protect all persons. Oh, you don't want this law to protect, babies before they're born? Then you may say that you believe they're persons, but your actions speak louder than words, right? You don't really believe that they're people. You really don't believe that they're people created in the image of God unless you are unless you're demanding, really, that equal protection be provided to them. The same protection that protects your life, that you are privileged to be protected by, you should want for others as well. Otherwise, it's just straight up bigotry.
Right. And now we're into kind of the part of this discussion that really is the part that he's completely avoiding, right? That Bart Barber did not address one bit. And so I don't exactly know where Bart Barber is on this because he hasn't really come out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Bart Barber has explicitly come out against equal protection, at least as far as I've seen. But he has come out in defense of Brent Leatherwood, who has come out against equal protection. But Bart Barber is not being straightforward enough to admit that was what your tweet was about. That's what the whole controversy about Brent Leatherwood is about. We can debate all the different nuances of abolitionism and abolition bills, and there's a lot to get through, and we should, and Bart Barber should engage us on those issues. That would be awesome. But that is not what your tweet was about. That's not what the resolution that we submitted this year at the SBC was about. That's not the conversation. The conversation is, should mothers who intentionally murder the children face legal consequences for doing so? And I think the fact that Bart Barber completely left out the entire controversy at hand, I think it shows that he doesn't think that's strong ground for him to be standing on. So he goes for the ectopic pregnancy.
There's no defense.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. He can't make an argument. Like he goes to ectopic pregnancy and the woman who's coerced and all these kind of emotional things, but he doesn't think that he can win on this point. And I think it shows how much progress we're gaining, both within the SBC and just within the culture at large, about equal protection.
Yeah, at SBC this year, you had Brent Leatherwood on one hand saying, you're never going to get me to say that women should be thrown behind bars. I mean, I have his exact quote. You're not going to get me to say that I want to throw mothers behind bars. This is not the view of this entity, the ERLC. That is not the view of this convention. It is not the view of the pro-life movement. That was proven yet again today. That's exactly what he said. So on one hand, you have Brent Leatherwood with the ERLC saying they will not pursue equal protection and abortion in the homicide codes. They will not pursue that, and that has never been their position. And on the other, Al Mohler was asked a question if he would and what he felt about equal protection, and he said this: we understand homicide is the killing of a human being, an unborn baby. I believe from the moment of conception until natural death is a human being deserving of that protection from conception. The law has means of making discernments and distinctions in agency. That means moral responsibility. And in context, how we make that apply in a question of abortion where even in terms of miscarriage, things may be difficult to define, I believe the law is capable of making those distinctions.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
And he went on and even explained further, like degrees of murder and culpability. But that was the discussion this year at SBC. Whenever there were several questions to these seminary presidents and ERLC, it became, where do we stand on equal protection? Leatherwood stands on one side, Al Mohler and many others stand on the other, and the reality is more and more and more of the common SBC folks, the Christians who have their Bibles, and they say, well, that looks like God made that child from fertilization, and they are equally deserving of protection as us. More and more are on the side of abolitionists and Al Mohler and not Brent Leatherwood.
Yeah, and Al Mohler has not always been there, but it really shows. I think that is what a genuine pro-lifer who's a Christian, when they look at this issue and they hear what we're saying, that's the conclusion they come away with, when they're being genuine and they're being honest. And I think this whole charge of abolitionists being bad faith actors, and that's been said for a very, very long time, but it's just projection. It's these guys are coming to the table, they're hearing these arguments, and this is what comes out of them because they don't have a genuine response to this. They have a dishonest response. And so they go to the emotional appeals. They use all the pro-abortion arguments. They don't genuinely evaluate it like I think Al Mohler did. And Al Mohler's mind was changed on it because I think he's legit. He's actually trying to reason through this.
Well, in 2015 or 16, when Trump actually came out, do you guys know the date? I think it was 2015
2015 during the campaign.
2016. It was during the campaign. He actually came out and said in an interview that women who intentionally murder their children should be punished. And the next day, Al Mohler said that has never been the position of the pro-life he didn't say establishment, but of pro-life movement. That's never been the position of the SBC or others. Now, he was humble enough to change his position whenever he compared it to the scriptures. And he heard, just like all of us at some point recognize, well, God's word actually has something to say about this. And he changed his position. He didn't demonize those of us who actually hold the same position as him now.
Yeah.
So that we're asking for an honest discussion. We don't need to have all this incendiary language.
Well, also, too, it's telling that, these guys are sort of the default leaders of the pro-life movement because they're in very influential places. They're in the head of the SBC. They're the head of the ERLC as well. So these guys are by default sort of the heads of the pro-life movement. And the pro-life movement has professional paid debaters that will not engage on this issue. They will engage people that they know are bad faith actors. They will engage the most pro-abortion, evil people, and they don't want to come in and engage with us on this.
Are you willing to debate someone like Scott Klusendorf?
Oh, yeah. That we've tried on many occasions, but he doesn't really want to respond. But
how would you go about trying to set up a debate with Scott Klusendorf or Bart Barber or Brent Leatherwood on this?
Tweeting at them.
Tweet at them. Are you putting it on record? Whoever, Bradley, are you willing to do a public debate with them?
Whatever format, that works for everybody.
Yeah.
Some kind of open discussion, debate, conversation, whatever we want it, just brotherly discussion. I'd love to have that. I think that'd be very helpful for all of us and for everybody who's considering these issues.
Yeah.
Coffee talk.
Right.
Whatever it takes.
I could see why some people wouldn't want to debate a hothead like me, but Callie, Bradley, Dusty, come on. Someone's got to be willing.
You might just try to put gum in their hair.
Well, and ultimately, if that doesn't happen, then people are going to have to go look for themselves. And I think a great place, and I hope y'all can drop it down in the description of this video, is the Southern Baptist for Abolishing Abortion's website. The resolution that was put forward at the SBC, 2023 or 2022 in Anaheim, that resolution there, to me, there's so much. You go look at that. There's so many scripture references, and don't even read the resolution. Just open up and just start going from one scripture reference to the next one, and just see what conclusion you come to. And again, put aside all the all the falsehoods that we've already disproven from Mr. Barber and that you're going to hear, but just go to the Bible and just see what it says. And it has so much to say about this. This is one of those issues that some people are like, well, the Bible's kind of silent on this. Like, no, it's not. It's not silent. Are you reading the same Bible? It's not silent. The Bible screams about oppression and justice and the fatherless and homicide and equal
Impartiality.
protection and how to love your neighbor as yourself, golden rule, right? I mean, it's everywhere. Partiality, don't show partiality in judgment. I mean, life begins at fertilization. It's clear in Scripture. It's so loud and clear. If you'll just look at it, open your eyes, ask the Holy Spirit to show you the truth. I believe it's clear to you. I believe it's super, super clear. So I hope more people will do that.
For sure. Yeah, I'm in Jeremiah right now in my finishing the Bible in a year, and it's just so clear. Every page of Scripture is so concerned with justice. And the fact that people can even say that the Bible doesn't talk about the finer details of justice, go read it again. Like, I don't know how you can have read this, especially as the president of the SBC. I don't know how you can have read this book and not come away with the conclusion that, yes, God has been very thorough in talking about what justice is for our preborn neighbors and that they deserve it.
Yeah. So I think a good place to maybe start wrapping things up for this episode would be, just go back to Bart Barber's, go back to his thread here. Honest discussion is not Dusty's or the abolitionist movement's goal. It is our goal. We want to honestly and sincerely walk through what it means to love our preborn neighbors as ourselves, what it means to provide them equal protection of the law, what the exact text of these abolition bills are and how they would be applied. That is, in the context of this discussion, that's all we want. That's what we spend most of our waking hours, at least us who are kind of in the abolitionist movement full time, most of our waking hours are concerned with pursuing all of these questions honestly and trying to articulate and explain them. And so to Bart and to Brent and to any SBC, ERLC people who would want to discuss this, please discuss this because that is the way out. Twitter threads like this are not the way out of, I think, what Bart, I think he says somewhere that, I forget if it was you or the abolitionist movement or something, is the gravest threat to the SBC right now, right, was in this Twitter thread. And so if that's the case, or to whatever degree that there's a controversy that's a threat, let's bring it into the light. Let's bring these ideas into the light, and we will do so honestly. We will do so assuming the best about Bart's motives, as difficult as he's making that. We will strive to assume the best about his motives and simply that he's mistaken about this stuff and not intentionally lying. And that's what we want to see. So. I guess a good place to close maybe. Dusty and Bradley, Dusty first, you want to talk about where people can connect with you and your work related to abolitionism?
Sure. I am a pastor at Grace Community Church of Elgin, Oklahoma. It's Southwest Oklahoma. If you're in the area, we'd love to have you stop by our church and come say hi and worship with us. I'm on Twitter, Dusty Deevers, and then you can go to rescuethose.com or southernbaptistabolishingabortion.com and see some writings and otherwise there. We have booklets, that a few booklets and a documentary that Rescue Those has put out. I just wrote this one on loving your IVF neighbor about in vitro fertilization. And then we have another booklet that we wrote called The Role of Civil Government. And it really helps Christians see what God's Word says about the role of God in government. And then we have this documentary called A Storm Comes Rolling Down the Plain that you can find on YouTube that really will help with some of the, how the church is to confront the culture of death in these days.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Bradley?
Yeah, you can check out what we do if you're in Texas, abolishAbortionTX.org, and even if you're not in Texas, we're actually writing blog posts there at least one a week, sometimes two a week, sending those out on our email list. If you want to join that, that's a great place. We have a YouTube channel with I think 90 videos up, a lot of them discussing these kind of issues, where you can kind of take a deeper dive. Or if you're outside of Texas, you can go to FAA.life for the Foundation to Abolish Abortion. That's FAA.life, and we have some material there, including the brief that we submitted to the Supreme Court on behalf of lots of abolitionist organizations, including Free the States, and Rescue Those, all of which signed on to that. Mm-hmm. And you can go check that out there. We have equal protection kind of materials, and you can get a lot more information there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for coming on. We hopefully are going to have Dusty back very soon to talk about IVF. That was the promised episode this week, but we did not make it happen. So
yeah, this was a bit more time sensitive with what's going on Twitter these days. So,
but we will revisit for sure, and hopefully soon. But yeah, thank you guys for coming on. This has been another episode of the Liberator podcast, where we're committed to being as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. We'll see you next week.